So today we are diving into a practice that has really captivated minds for millennia. It's a discipline that kind of straddles the line between this ancient spiritual quest and modern biological optimization.
Exactly. We're talking about the deliberate abstinence from ejaculation.
Right. Seminal conservation, sexual continence. It has a lot of names.
Hmm.
But the fundamental question is, what actually happens to the human mind and body when that specific biological release is intentionally halted?
And it's a truly rich area to look into because it really forces us to go beyond these simplistic ideas of sexual health. This practice has seen a dramatic resurgence.
It's huge, especially online.
Hugely, yeah. It's largely fueled by these online communities that frame it as this crucial life hack or, a performance enhancer. They claim it unlocks everything from boundless energy to unshakable confidence and razor-sharp focus.
And that right there, that's the central tension we're exploring today. Is this practice truly an evolutionary hack that somehow changes your fundamental biology for the better? Making you a higher performing version of yourself.
Or are the powerful, and they're undeniably powerful effects that people report, are they rooted primarily in something else? Like the deep psychological victory of just exercising self-control and removing what can be a highly addictive, compulsive behavior?
That's the core question.
So our mission in this deep dive is to move entirely beyond anecdote and mythology. We're going to meticulously unpack the measurable science, scrutinizing the quantitative findings about energy and focus.
We'll also get into the neuroscience of it all, what's happening in the brain with chronic stimulation and then recovery.
And we have to look at the profound historical context. This stretches from, Taoist alchemy all the way to ancient Indian medicine. And critically, we will analyze the vital medical trade-offs and the potential drawbacks that modern science has uncovered.
Right. We want to give you the comprehensive, balanced understanding you need to be truly well-informed about this deeply personal and, let's face it, widely discussed practice.
Let's get into it.
Okay, so to begin, we have to establish a solid foundation. Let's look at some measurable data. This is where we move past the online testimonials and look at recent quantitative studies that specifically investigated the effects of a period of abstinence.
Right. So researchers looked at single male subjects who committed to a 3-week period of what they called APM, abstinence from pornography and masturbation.
Okay, that's a key distinction.
It's a very key framing because it isolates the behavior that's so often associated with compulsive consumption and those high levels of novelty stimulation. The researchers wanted to see if the massive subjective changes that people report anecdotally, the superpowers, as some call them,
Right.
could actually be objectively quantified against a control group that just, maintained their usual habits.
And the findings. Well, they weren't subtle, were they? They were clear, statistically significant effects.
Not at all. And they categorized them by magnitude. The single strongest effect they measured across the entire study. It concerned fatigue.
Just fatigue in general.
Well, that's what's so interesting. It wasn't a mild adjustment. It was a profound reduction in 2 distinct types of fatigue. First, mental fatigue was significantly diminished.
Okay, define mental fatigue for us.
Mental fatigue is that sense of brain fog, the inability to concentrate, the difficulty holding complex thoughts, or just the feeling that your focus is constantly fragmented.
I think we all know that feeling.
We do. And when the subjects abstained for 3 weeks, that mental fog lifted in a highly measurable way.
That mental clarity, that is the holy grail for so many people who try this. They talk about a renewed ability to study, to work, to just focus on complex tasks. That aligns perfectly with reduced mental fatigue.
And it was coupled with a measurable reduction in physiological fatigue.
So body fatigue.
Exactly. The simple general physical tiredness, that feeling of weakness, or just the lack of physical energy to get up and engage in activity. The data pointed very strongly toward a genuinely observable energizing effect. It was moving subjects from a state of, say, languidness to one of physical readiness.
Now, this is where the research gets really granular and fascinating for me.
Yeah.
The study didn't just look at abstinence from porn and masturbation. They isolated the variable of partnered sexual activity.
Yes. They established a subgroup that practiced APMS.
Okay, what's the S?
Abstinence from pornography, masturbation, and partnered sex. So a complete 3-week period of total sexual continence.
And why was isolating that group so crucial? If the issue is the hyperstimulation of internet consumption, You might assume that natural partnered sex wouldn't really interfere with the benefits.
That's a brilliant question, and it really speaks to the nuance of the reward system. So, while we hypothesize that pornography acts as this supernormal stimulus, which we'll get into more later, the researchers discovered something really telling.
What was it?
The group that achieved complete sexual continence, that APMS group, they showed even stronger reductions in both mental and physiological fatigue than the group that only abstained from masturbation and porn but continued partnered sex.
Wow. So removing the high stimulation behavior, like porn, is highly beneficial. But removing all sexual input, even the natural lower stimulus kind, that actually magnifies the energizing effect.
Precisely. This suggests a couple of possibilities. First, the magnitude of the energizing and focus-boosting effect might be directly proportional to the overall degree of sexual stimulation you remove from the system.
Kind of dose-response relationship.
Sort of, yeah. And second, it suggests there might be a physiological component to ejaculation itself, even in a non-compulsive context, that temporarily induces lethargy or a reduced state of arousal.
So it's not just about the source of the stimulation, it's about the total cessation of the physiological cycle. That's a really key piece of information for anyone trying to optimize their energy levels.
Beyond fatigue, they also cataloged a whole series of medium-sized but still highly notable benefits. One of the most important for just, generalized well-being was a statistically significant increase in self-control.
That's a crucial finding. It suggests that the discipline required to maintain abstinence doesn't just benefit you in the sexual domain, right? It strengthens your general capacity for self-regulation across the board.
Absolutely. I like to think of self-control as a psychological muscle. The more you successfully exercise it in one highly tempting area, the stronger that muscle becomes for all future temptations, whether that's your diet, your finances, your work ethic.
And the data confirms this generalized strengthening effect.
It does.
What other medium effects did they find that tie back to all those anecdotal claims we hear?
Well, they found a measurable reduction in shyness and social inhibition. Participants reported feeling significantly less anxious, less inhibited, and more capable in social settings.
Okay, and that, coupled with the increased self-control, immediately maps onto the anecdotal reports of increased confidence.
It makes perfect psychological sense, right? If you're less anxious and you feel more capable of regulating your own behavior, your social confidence is naturally going to increase.
Of course.
We also saw increased wakefulness and activity. They were measurably more active and awake throughout the day. And finally, there was a reported increase in inspiration.
Which also makes sense. If you're less mentally fatigued and more awake, your mind is just more open to creative and inspiring thought.
It's a whole package of results. The increased self-control, reduced shyness, more activity, inspiration. It shows how abstinence can quickly translate into improved personal and professional performance. It's like a behavioral stack that yields success.
And here's a fascinating parallel the research drew, which I think puts this whole practice into a much broader context.
Yes, this is really interesting. They noted that these observed benefits, specifically the reduced fatigue, the improved concentration, and the emotional balance share, really striking similarities with effects seen in studies of therapeutic or dietary short-term fasting.
So like intermittent fasting or observing certain religious fasts, like Ramadan.
Exactly. When subjects engage in short-term fasting, researchers have consistently documented improved daytime concentration, better mood, and a reduction in general fatigue.
But wait a minute, how does limiting food intake connect to limiting sexual activity? I mean, on the surface, they seem biologically unrelated.
They are biologically distinct, for sure, but they seem to converge on a common neurological mechanism: the limitation of high-reward, high-stimulation input. Both food, especially sugary or highly palatable food, and sexual stimulation, especially novel high-intensity pornography, powerfully activate the brain's reward circuits. So when you limit either or both, you seem to engage this internal reset mechanism.
So whether you're restricting caloric input or dopaminergic input, the brain interprets the cessation as an opportunity to downregulate, to stabilize, and maybe recover from that chronic stimulation.
That's the hypothesis. Limiting stimulation, no matter the source, seems to pull the nervous system back toward homeostasis. This leads to a state of reduced excitability and improved regulation, which then translates outwardly as better focus, and less fatigue.
And that's why the findings feel less like a niche sexual practice and more like a form of generalized behavior modification.
And the final confirmation here is just how strongly these objective, quantitative results confirm the widespread anecdotal reports that existed long before the study ever did.
The convergence is really striking, isn't it?
It's incredible. Anecdotes about improved mental clarity are confirmed by the data on reduced mental fatigue. The claims of boosted self-confidence are underpinned by the reduction in shyness and social inhibition.
And the claims of increased productivity are directly traceable to that robust reduction in both forms of fatigue. So for you listening, if you've heard about these claims online, we can confirm the core benefits that get reported, the energy, the mental bandwidth, it's not some mass delusion. Something measurable is happening when an individual, especially one who is habitually consuming high stimulus material, commits to a period of abstinence.
Now that we know what happens, we really need to address why it happens. We need to transition from just the observed effects to the underlying mechanisms in the brain, which are deeply rooted in how we process pleasure and reward and novelty.
Okay, let's unpack the brain's role in this.
Yeah.
We know that sexual activity is a primary driver of the brain's reward system.
Absolutely. The release of dopamine during sexual arousal and activity is crucial. But dopamine isn't really the pleasure molecule itself. It's the motivation and anticipation molecule.
It's the go-get-it molecule.
It's the go-get-it molecule. It tells the brain, this is important, seek this out again. However, the equation changes drastically in the digital age, specifically with internet pornography.
You referred to this earlier as a supernormal stimulus. Let's elaborate on what that concept means.
A supernormal stimulus is an artificial or, an exaggerated version of a natural cue that elicits a response that's stronger than the natural one.
Yeah.
In the case of internet pornography, it provides an almost infinite source of novelty, intensity, and immediate gratification. It far surpasses the variable availability of sexual rewards in the real world. This unlimited novelty, combined with that immediate reward anticipation, it hyperactivates the dopaminergic system in a way our evolutionary wiring was simply not designed to handle.
So the brain is constantly being driven to a level 10 intensity, day after day, week after week. I mean, that sounds like chronic neurological stress.
It is, effectively. Think of the reward system like a streetlight dimmer switch. If you constantly run that dimmer at 100% capacity day and night, the system starts to struggle. Over time, research investigating the neural correlates of high consumption suggests that this chronic overactivation can lead to measurable structural changes.
Structural changes in the brain. What kind are we talking about, and how do they impact daily function like focus and energy?
And we have to be really clear here. This research suggests a correlation, not a guaranteed causation for everyone. But studies have pointed toward structural impairment in specific dorsolateral striatal structures.
Okay, those are pretty technical terms.
They are. Specifically, the right caudate and the left putamen.
How do the caudate and putamen relate to the fatigue we were just talking about?
Right, good question. This is where it gets really interesting. These striatal structures form a critical circuit that is heavily involved in executing what we call cognitive control.
Cognitive control. So think of that as your central executive functioning, the ability to focus attention, resist distraction, plan things out.
That's it, exactly. It's the mechanism that allows you to choose long-term gain over short-term gratification. It's the part of you that chooses to work on the project instead of scrolling on your phone.
So these are the structures responsible for discipline, planning, and mental endurance.
Precisely. And if that system is chronically stressed or impaired, its functionality decreases. We know that impairment in this cognitive control circuit has been directly linked to increased mental fatigue and dysfunctional sleep-wake regulation.
Which results in reduced daytime arousal.
In other words, feeling sleepy and unable to focus during the day.
That offers a powerful structural explanation for the core finding of reduced mental and physiological fatigue. The abstinence is allowing this fatigued, hyperstimulated control circuit to downregulate and, I guess, begin healing.
It's a very plausible neurological pathway. But the observed benefits also include psychological gains, like reduced shyness. That involves emotion regulation.
So how does chronic stimulation impact our ability to handle social situations?
Well, studies on individuals exhibiting compulsive sexual behavior, which is often tied to high stimulus consumption, have shown reduced functional connectivity between two crucial areas of the brain. The first is the amygdala.
The fear center.
Well, it processes emotional and motivational salience. It tags things as important or threatening. It's the alarm bell. The second is the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, or DLPFC, which is the brain's chief regulator of emotion and social behavior, the calming center.
So if the link between the emotional alarm bell, the amygdala, and the rational calming center, the DLPFC, is weakened, your emotional response is going to be less regulated and more reactive.
Exactly right. This malfunction in emotion regulation is strongly associated with states like depressed mood, generalized anxiety, and social shyness. The hypothesis, then, is that the period of abstinence allows these crucial neural connections to strengthen and restore their functionality.
So as the reward circuits stabilize, the individual regains better control over their emotional landscape.
And that leads directly to the observed reduction in shyness and social inhibition.
This neurological recovery hypothesis, it sounds strikingly similar to how the brain adapts after, say, substance cessation.
It's a direct parallel. The literature on substance-induced rewards, for example, studies involving recovery from chronic stimulant use, confirms that abstinence is absolutely essential for neurological reward structures to begin to recover and normalize.
And in those cases, the recovery rate was inversely related to the dose and duration of prior use, right?
It was, meaning the heavier the use, the longer the recovery period. And that is a really sober point for anyone seeking a quick fix from this.
Absolutely.
Since sexual and substance rewards share these underlying dopaminergic mechanisms, it's highly plausible that the benefits from sexual abstinence are also a result of this regeneration process. It's a biological nervous system reset that takes time, and that time is proportional to the prior level of stimulation.
So beyond the underlying biological rewiring, we also have just the sheer psychological power of successful discipline. Let's look at that self-control element.
The psychological boost you get from successfully maintaining a committed period of abstinence is immense, and it's immediate. When people successfully manage to curb a compulsive consumption habit, they gain this powerful sense of renewed personal control.
And crucially, that sense of control rarely stays confined to just the sexual domain, right?
No, it activates the concept of generalized self-control. Every time you successfully resist a powerful craving, you are strengthening that mental muscle of discipline. This leads to increased perceived self-efficacy, the belief in your own ability to succeed, and a stronger sense of personal autonomy.
So if I can manage to stop this difficult compulsive behavior, I can certainly manage to start running every morning or stop eating sugar.
That is the psychological fuel. That feeling of mastery is an incredibly potent resource, and the psychological restructuring, the regained self-efficacy, directly contributes to the observed energizing effects and the reduction in shyness, because you feel more robustly capable of handling the demands of your environment.
Before we leave the mechanics of the body and mind, we need to address one tiny, often oversimplified physiological mechanism. It's cited all the time in online discussions.
The post-ejaculation hormonal effect.
Exactly. This is the short-term process versus the weeks-long neurological reset we've been talking about.
We're talking about prolactin. Prolactin is a hormone released by the pituitary gland, and its levels surge immediately following ejaculation. Its primary role in this context is as a powerful libido suppressant. It initiates and maintains the refractory period.
That postcoital lassitude, the inability to become aroused again immediately.
Correct. And this elevated prolactin level can linger, depending on the individual and the intensity of the event, for roughly 24 hours, sometimes longer. When prolactin is high, the brain registers lower desire and general lethargy.
So the sudden confidence boost that many practitioners claim in the first 48 to 72 hours, it isn't necessarily some massive spiritual awakening. It might simply be the nervous system returning to its normal pre-ejaculation baseline after that prolactin-induced suppression wears off.
It's a temporary physiological mechanism playing out over hours, not weeks. The feeling of increased energy and restored libido in those initial days is partly the result of moving past that prolactin-driven low point, which the body typically experiences. It provides a quick lift, which then fuels the psychological momentum needed for the longer neurological rewiring process.
It's absolutely vital that we place this discussion in its proper historical context now. I mean, what the internet calls a reset or a biohack is, in reality, a practice with profound spiritual and philosophical roots that go back thousands of years. This is not a new idea.
Far from it. Across various major civilizations, there has always been a belief system dedicated to conserving what was perceived as the core life essence through sexual continence.
Yeah.
And a great place to start is one of the most explicit examples, ancient Chinese Taoism.
In Taoism, this practice is enshrined in the belief system surrounding internal alchemy.
Indeed. The specific practice is huanjing buno, which is often translated as returning the seminescence to replenish the brain.
Wow. That terminology is incredibly powerful. The idea of sending the essence straight back up to enhance your mental power.
The central goal for Taoist practitioners was often to maintain intense sexual arousal, what they called jingshen, but to prevent the emission of the physical fluid. They would achieve this through a practice called coitus reservatus, or intercourse without ejaculation, or by manually interrupting the process.
And the purpose was to retain the jing, which is the seminal essence, allowing it to travel up the spine to nourish the brain, boosting overall well-being and enhancing the foundational life force, the yuanqi.
And this is where we need to introduce the nuance between the spiritual aspiration and the physiological reality. As sophisticated as the spiritual system was, anatomically, seminal fluid cannot circulate up the spinal cord to the cerebrum. That's impossible.
Okay, so what was actually happening physically when they performed these techniques to block the release?
When practitioners used manual techniques like applying firm pressure to the perineum or other methods of retention, the physical reality often resulted in what modern medicine calls retrograde ejaculation.
Meaning the seminal fluid is produced, but instead of being expelled through the urethra, it gets rerouted backward into the bladder.
Correct. It then simply mixes with the urine and is excreted during the next urination cycle. So the physical effect was not some mystical ascension, it was internal redirection and eventual excretion. This has to temper any claims that seminal fluid is physically feeding the brain.
But if the physical outcome was just redirection to the bladder, why did this concept become such a pillar of Taoist practice?
Because the deeper, more sophisticated understanding is allegorical, the goal was not the conservation of the material fluid itself, but the transformation of the energy it represented.
Ah, okay, the transmutation of raw energy.
Exactly. The system of Taoist internal alchemy is based on refining three treasures: Jing, Qi, and Shen. Jing is the densest energy, the sexual seed, or the raw life potential. The act of retention and discipline was intended to transform this dense, raw Jing into the more subtle, circulating vital energy called Qi.
Qi is the vital breath, the energy that flows through the body.
And that Qi would then be refined even further into Shen, which represents spirit, awareness, or spiritual illumination. The retention, therefore, was a rigorous discipline. It was a form of spiritual metallurgy where the sexual impulse was harnessed, sublimated, and transmuted into higher forms of consciousness and spiritual power.
That framework completely redefines the concept. It shifts from a physiological claim to a spiritual path aimed at elevating the soul and achieving longevity, not just a performance boost.
And we see an equally profound and compelling, though often more fraught, belief system in the Indian subcontinent, particularly within ancient Ayurvedic and Vedic traditions. Here, semen isn't just energy. It's considered the most precious, vital substance in the male body. It's known as virya, or sukra.
The cultural value assigned to this fluid is just immense. It's not just fluid, it's life itself.
It's viewed as the ultimate purified essence. Ancient texts detail this rigorous, almost unimaginable multi-step condensation process that transforms food into body tissues, culminating in semen. The belief system posited a 40 times condensation at each stage,
40 times.
leading to the astonishing conclusion that one single drop of semen is formed from 40 drops of bone marrow.
40 drops of bone marrow just for one drop of semen. That scarcity instantly justifies why its conservation would be viewed as paramount to life itself. I mean, losing it would be akin to bleeding out your most precious internal reserves.
Absolutely. And within this deeply ingrained, culture-bound belief system, any loss of virya, whether through masturbation, nocturnal emissions, or excessive sexual activity, is strongly linked to severe physical and psychological decline.
What specific symptoms were attributed to this perceived loss?
Oh, the list is comprehensive. A generalized loss of happiness and memory, depletion of vigor, overall weakness and fatigue, and frightening physical symptoms like heart palpitation. The loss of semen was seen as the literal source of bodily decay.
It's so clear how a belief system that equates semen loss with fundamental decline could lead to profound psychological distress when that loss is perceived.
And it leads us directly to a crucial culture-bound psychosomatic condition known as DAT syndrome. This condition is highly prevalent in the Indian subcontinent, and it's a powerful demonstration of the mind-body connection when it's rooted in cultural belief.
What characterizes DAT syndrome?
Men suffering from this condition experience intense anxiety, severe depression, and a range of very real somatic or physical symptoms like generalized weakness, severe fatigue, even chronic pain.
And the trigger isn't necessarily excessive sexual activity, but the fear of loss itself.
Exactly. The symptoms are directly attributed to the intense fear and shame associated with perceived semen loss. Often, men suffering from DAT syndrome will observe semen-like substances in their urine or have nocturnal emissions, which they then interpret as the catastrophic wastage of their vital viria.
So the core belief that this substance is essential, coupled with the observation of its perceived loss, triggers a cycle of psychological distress that manifests as genuine, debilitating physical symptoms.
It demonstrates the immense power of cultural conditioning. If you are taught from birth that losing this essence makes you fundamentally weak, the moment you believe you have lost it, your body reflects that belief through genuine physical symptoms like weakness and fatigue.
It's the ultimate negative feedback loop.
It is, and this historical context underscores a critical point for our modern listeners. While the internet movement promotes abstinence as a path to empowerment, the historical and cultural perspective shows that tying your self-worth and well-being so rigidly to seminal conservation can become a source of profound, debilitating shame and anxiety. The mindset of conservation can really cut both ways.
Okay, so we've established that the practice of seminal conservation offers measurable mental and performance gains. These seem to be driven by neurological recovery and the psychological boost of self-control. However, our deep dive requires us to turn the coin over and look critically at the physical realities, the potential trade-offs, and the vital health data points that run counter to the conservation equals health narrative.
And this is perhaps the most important counterpoint in the whole discussion. When we talk about long-term physical health, specifically concerning the prostate gland, which is directly involved in the process of ejaculation, the evidence strongly shifts away from total conservation.
What do the long-term epidemiological studies reveal about ejaculation frequency and the risk of prostate cancer?
Extensive, multi-decade studies have established a clear and robust inverse relationship,
Inverse meaning.
meaning that higher lifetime ejaculation frequency is statistically linked to a lower overall risk of being diagnosed with prostate cancer. In other words, frequent ejaculation appears to play a protective, beneficial role.
That is a fundamental contradiction to the idea that holding fluid in is healthier. This is a massive trade-off, potentially sacrificing long-term physical health for short-term performance gains.
It demands very careful consideration, and the data is highly specific. Men who reported a high frequency of ejaculation defined in these studies as 21 or more ejaculations per month
21 or more.
were significantly less likely to be diagnosed with prostate cancer, especially the low-risk forms of the disease, when compared to men who ejaculated only 4 to 7 times per month.
21 times per month averages out to a frequency of almost once per day. This suggests that maintaining a high, steady frequency is the protective behavior.
That is what the epidemiological data suggests. And while the precise biological mechanism for this protective effect is still being researched, there are several theories that are strongly supported.
What are the hypothesized mechanisms? Why is frequent ejaculation beneficial for the prostate?
One of the leading hypotheses suggests a physical flushing mechanism. Ejaculation allows the prostate to flush out potential carcinogens or pro-inflammatory compounds that might accumulate in the prostate ducts over time.
So if these compounds are retained for long periods, they could increase the local exposure and risk of cellular damage.
That's the idea. It's essentially a necessary plumbing mechanism clearing out the pipes to prevent buildup and irritation.
Makes sense.
A second related theory centers on reducing interprostatic inflammation. The retention of seminal fluid for prolonged periods might lead to greater inflammation within the gland. Frequent ejaculation may help reduce this accumulation of inflammatory agents, and we know that chronic inflammation is a risk factor for cancer development in various organs.
So regular release acts as both a pressure release and a clearing mechanism.
That's right. This evidence makes it very clear that while abstinence may offer a neurological reset, it could potentially conflict with established practices for maintaining prostate health as you age.
And we also have to address fertility and sperm quality. This is another area where the intuition of conservation often conflicts directly with scientific reality.
It really does. The intuitive assumption is that the longer you save the sperm, the higher quality the sample will be when you finally release it.
And that intuition is partially correct, but only regarding quantity, right?
Exactly. Longer periods of abstinence certainly increase overall semen volume and sperm concentration. However, when we look at functional quality, meaning the health and viability of the sperm's DNA, the science tells a very different story.
What happens to sperm quality during prolonged storage in the body?
The seminal fluid and sperm cells are highly sensitive to their environment. Prolonged abstinence periods, particularly those extending beyond 5 to 7 days, correlate with statistically significant decreases in critical quality metrics.
What are those key quality metrics we should know about?
First, we see reduced sperm motility and vitality. That's how well they swim and how many are alive. More importantly, we see statistically significant increases in sperm DNA fragmentation and abnormal mitochondrial damage.
DNA fragmentation. That sounds really serious for fertility. What causes the DNA to get damaged like that?
It's largely a consequence of oxidative stress. While sperm are stored in the epididymis, that coiled tube behind the testicle, they're subject to the normal metabolic processes of the body, which generate reactive oxygen species, or ROS.
And if the sperm remains stored for too long, they accumulate damage from these oxidative stressors. They essentially become senescent or aged.
Precisely. This leads to compromised DNA integrity, which drastically reduces their viability for conception.
So holding onto the sperm for too long results in sluggish, genetically damaged sperm. The fresh product is the healthiest.
That is the scientific consensus. Studies show that short abstinence windows, typically around 2 to 5 days or even periods as short as 24 hours, generally yield the best functional sperm quality. It ensures a constant turnover of fresh sperm, minimizing the accumulation of DNA damage.
So for our listeners who might be actively trying to conceive, the guidance is clear. Frequent, short cycles of abstinence are scientifically favored over long-term retention. The biological imperative here is renewal, not conservation.
And moving away from the long-term health trade-offs, let's briefly address the immediate physical discomforts and potential complications of routine suppression,
The famous or infamous blue balls.
formerly known as epididymal hypertension. This is simply an aching or pain in the testicles or groin area. It results from prolonged sexual arousal that leads to increased blood flow or vasocongestion without the subsequent ejaculation to relieve that vascular pressure.
It's uncomfortable, but it's fundamentally harmless.
Correct. It is a temporary vascular phenomenon that resolves quickly as the blood naturally dissipates. It's not an indication of physical harm, just discomfort from unreleased tension.
What about the risks associated with regularly overriding a strong biological reflex? Can consistently suppressing the ejaculation response lead to issues down the line?
It can, yeah. Routinely suppressing the ejaculation reflex may contribute to long-term issues. For some, this practice can lead to anejaculation, which is the learned inability to ejaculate when you want to, even during high arousal.
Okay.
Furthermore, individuals who rely on manual suppression techniques like pressing on the perineum, as some of the ancient Taoists practice risk-inducing retrograde ejaculation as a persistent condition, where semen regularly travels backward into the bladder.
So the spiritual goal of transmutation, achieved through a specific physical technique, can result in a lasting physiological complication. It brings the history right into the modern clinic.
It does. And finally, we have to look at the psychological pitfalls that are inherent in the highly structured, streak-oriented world of the online abstinence communities.
That intense initial boost in self-control often hits a wall. Practitioners refer to this period as the flat line.
The flat line is a common and often unavoidable reality during the neurological reset. It's characterized by a temporary psychological downturn, temporary depression, heightened irritability, a complete loss of libido, and very low energy.
And practitioners interpret this as the necessary period of withdrawal as the brain's reward circuitry recalibrates to a lower, more sustainable level of stimulation.
Exactly. But the initial euphoric boost from self-control gives way to this low point as the dopamine system adapts, which can be highly discouraging for people who are expecting a linear increase in happiness.
And the most dangerous psychological pitfall here is the obsession with maintaining a perfect streak.
That's it. The structure of these communities can often lead individuals to base their self-worth, their confidence, and their general progress entirely on the duration of their abstinence.
And what happens when the inevitable relapse occurs?
A relapse in this context can trigger immense shame, debilitating anxiety, and an extremely negative self-perception. It completely undermines the initial psychological gains of self-efficacy. They perceive themselves as having failed fundamentally.
That sounds alarmingly like the negative mental feedback loop we discussed earlier with DAT syndrome. It's the modern manifestation of tying your self-worth to seminal conservation, where shame over perceived failure triggers profound psychological distress.
It's the rigid psychological mandate that causes the damage. The beneficial psychological gains from successfully exercising self-control are completely undone when the discipline evolves into a rigid, shame-based obsession. For this practice to be healthy, the focus has to remain on the positive application of discipline, not the fear of failure.
This deep dive has taken us from measurable reductions in mental fatigue right back to the esoteric origins of life force conservation. We've certainly seen two very distinct and at times contradictory sides of this equation.
On one side, the data is clear. A committed period of abstinence from excessive high-stimulation input, particularly internet pornography and masturbation, can yield measurable benefits in mental clarity, energy, focus, and reduced social anxiety.
It's a powerful, short-term tool for a neurological reset.
It is. It's driven by the recovery of overstimulated reward circuitry and the psychological empowerment of successful discipline.
It's the neurological equivalent of putting the dimmer switch back on a stable setting and simultaneously winning a major internal battle. But this can't be viewed in isolation. We have to honor the crucial counterpoints regarding physical health.
Correct. Conversely, the long-term epidemiological evidence points strongly toward frequent ejaculation in the range of 21 or more times per month being protective of prostate health. This is likely due to flushing mechanisms and reduced chronic inflammation.
And for those seeking optimal fertility, very short abstinence windows are required to ensure the highest functional sperm quality and DNA integrity. So, the idea that seminal conservation is universally better is simply false. What constitutes a healthy practice is entirely dependent on an individual's immediate goals. Are you a 25-year-old trying to break a cycle of compulsive behavior and regain focus? Or are you a 55-year-old optimizing for long-term prostate health? The scientific answer changes based on the context.
That is the essential takeaway. There is no universal rule for frequency. The greatest, most durable benefit of the entire practice, regardless of the physical mechanism, may simply be the successful elimination of compulsive high-stimulus behavior.
Because the success of applying self-control to this domain demonstrates a generalized capacity for discipline.
That can then be successfully leveraged across all other foundational aspects of life, your fitness goals, your professional pursuits, your dietary compliance.
It seems the actual superpower isn't the fluid itself, but the mastery of self-control required to redefine your relationship with instant gratification.
Which brings us back to our starting point and our final thought for you to consider. We've established that the principles of reward system recovery and enhanced self-control overlap significantly across different forms of abstinence, from sexual activity to dietary fasting. The brain seems optimized to respond positively when you deliberately limit intense, addictive reward signals.
And that raises a compelling question. If the goal is truly improved focus, energy, and overall well-being, what other forms of reward abstinence beyond the realm of sexual activity might yield those same measurable improvements?
Exactly. Think about the constant drip feed of social media scrolling, the endless stream of binge-watching entertainment, or the habit of instant gratification buying. What habit, if you chose to master its cessation for just a short, defined period, might unlock your own potential for focus and energy? It's not just about what you choose to keep in your system, it's about what you choose to take out of your daily routine.